The first snow of winter had arrived in Havenwood not with gentle persuasion, but as a stark, voluminous hush, blanketing the familiar contours of the small town in an unforgiving white. Alara Vance, her silver hair tucked beneath a woolen hat, watched the flakes from the window of O'Malley's general store, her breath misting the cold pane. At 68, she moved with a quiet deliberation, a habit learned from years spent as the town librarian, navigating aisles of whispered stories and hushed reverence. Now retired, her days were her own, yet often found her treading the same familiar paths, a comforting rhythm in the solitude of her widowhood. The bell above O'Malley's door jingled, a cheerful counterpoint to the wind's mournful sigh. Alara had only come for a small bag of flour and a tin of Earl Grey tea, but the storm had quickened its pace, urging shoppers homeward. As she stepped outside, pulling the collar of her forest green jacket tighter, her gaze fell upon a figure huddled on the bench near the war memorial. It was an old man, his frame thin and bent, shoulders hunched against the biting wind that whipped snowflakes into a frenzy around him. He wore a coat, but it was threadbare, more a memory of warmth than a present comfort. His hands, raw and chapped, were shoved deep into its pockets, and a shiver racked his body that was visible even from a distance. Alara hesitated. Most people hurried past, heads down, their own discomfort a pressing concern. But something in the way the man sat, an ingrained stillness that seemed to fight the tremor in his limbs, snagged at her heart. It was a posture she remembered from her late husband, Thomas, after he'd returned from his service, a certain way of holding oneself against the world, as if braced for an impact only he could perceive. She walked towards him, her boots crunching softly on the freshly fallen snow. "Excuse me," she said, her voice gentle, barely carrying over the wind. The man looked up. His eyes, a faded blue, were watery from the cold, set deep in a face etched with hardship. A sparse, white beard clung to his chin, dusted with snowflakes. He offered no reply, just a tired, questioning gaze. It's terribly cold," Alara continued, feeling a familiar pang of empathy that always seemed to find its home in the hollows left by Thomas. "You must be freezing." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his gaze dropping to his worn boots. Alara looked at his thin coat, then down at her own. The green jacket was her favorite, a gift from Thomas years ago, a sturdy, hand-knitted wool that had seen her through many winters. It was lined with soft fleece, warm as a hearth. Without a second thought, born from a place deeper than deliberation, she began to unbutton it. "Here," she said, holding it out. "Please, take this. You need it more than I do." The man's head snapped up, his eyes widening slightly. He looked from the jacket to her face, a flicker of disbelief, then suspicion, crossing his features. I can't," he mumbled, his voice raspy, unused. "Nonsense," Alara insisted kindly. "I live just a short walk from here. I have other coats. This one is very warm." She didn't mention that none were quite like this one, nor as cherished. She draped the jacket over his narrow shoulders. He was so thin, it enveloped him. He flinched slightly at her touch, then seemed to sag into the unexpected warmth. His hands emerged slowly from his pockets, and he touched the thick wool, his fingers tracing the cable-knit pattern. "But you—" "I'll be fine," Alara assured him, though the wind immediately bit at her through her thinner sweater. She gave him a small, encouraging smile. "Please keep it. Get yourself somewhere warm if you can." He looked at her again, a profound, searching look that made her feel he was seeing more than just a woman offering a coat. For a moment, a glimmer of something ancient and proud sparked in his tired eyes, before being doused by the weariness that clung to him like the snow. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible. He pulled the jacket around himself, his chin sinking into its collar. The deep green seemed to bring a touch of life to his pallid complexion. Alara nodded, a sudden tightness in her throat. "Stay warm," she said softly, then turned and walked away, her own shoulders now hunched against the cold. She didn't look back, a quiet understanding passing between them that needed no further words. The wind seemed to push her homeward, carrying with it the unspoken weight of the encounter. She felt the cold acutely now, a sharp contrast to the warmth she had just given away, but it was a discomfort mingled with a deeper, more resonant feeling, a quiet rightness that settled in her soul. As soft and encompassing as the falling snow, she knew little of the man, not even his name, but she recognized the landscape of quiet suffering, and in her small way, had sought to offer a moment's shelter. Alara's cottage, nestled at the end of a lane bordered by old oaks, was a haven of remembered warmth. Inside, the scent of dried lavender and old books greeted her. She made her tea, her hands slightly stiff from the cold, and sat by the window, watching the storm intensify. The image of the old man, swallowed by her green jacket, remained vivid in her mind. She didn't consider her act heroic or even particularly noteworthy. It was simply a human response to another's visible need. She'd done what anyone should, she thought, though a quiet part of her knew that wasn't always true. The following days were filled with the small routines that structured her life. She tidied her small library, dusted the photographs of Thomas, one in his crisp uniform, young and smiling, another of them both, years later, lines of shared laughter around their eyes. She worried, fleetingly, about the man on the bench. Had he found shelter? Was the jacket truly keeping him warm? The local shelter was often full in such weather, and Havenwood, for all its quaint charm, had its share of forgotten souls. Her own discomfort without her best winter jacket was a small, persistent reminder. Her other coats were adequate for quick trips, but none possessed the comforting weight and deep warmth of the green one. She found herself layering more, lingering less when she stepped outside. Sometimes, she'd catch herself reaching for it on its usual peg by the door, only to remember. It wasn't regret she felt, but a faint, lingering echo of the man's coldness, and a quiet hope that he was now less cold because of its absence from her life. She never spoke of the incident to anyone. It was a private transaction, a moment sealed by the snow and the wind, and she felt no need to share it. It was, after all, just a jacket. The snow continued to fall for 2 more days, cocooning Havenwood in a silent, white world. Roads were cleared slowly, the town operating at a reduced pace. Alara kept to her home, finding solace in her books and the steady rhythm of her knitting needles, working on a new scarf, the yarn, a soft, unassuming gray. She often thought of Thomas during such quiet, housebound days. He had loved the snow, the way it transformed the world, making it clean and new. He had also understood the cold, its cruel, biting reality from his time in harsh landscapes during his service. He would have approved of her giving the jacket, she knew. He'd always told her that kindness was a currency that never devalued. Then, on the 4th morning after her encounter, the snow had stopped. A weak winter sun attempted to pierce the heavy cloud cover, casting a pale, diffused light over the transformed landscape. Alara was sweeping the light dusting of snow from her porch steps when she saw it. A dark, official-looking car, utterly out of place on her quiet lane, making its way slowly towards her cottage. It parked by her gate, and a man in a crisp, dark uniform emerged. He was tall, with a stern, disciplined bearing, his cap perfectly aligned, his movements precise. He carried a briefcase. Alara's heart gave a small, uncertain flutter. This was not the sort of visitor her quiet life usually attracted. She watched as he opened her gate and walked up the freshly swept path, his polished shoes making no sound on the thin layer of remaining snow. He stopped before her, his expression serious, his eyes assessing. "Mrs. Alara Vance?" he asked. His voice was resonant, formal. "Yes," Alara replied, her hand instinctively going to her throat. "That's me." "My name is Commander Alistair Finch," he stated, his gaze direct, unwavering. "United States Navy. May I have a word with you, ma'am? It's rather important." Alara's mind raced. The Navy? What could the Navy possibly want with her? A sudden, cold fear gripped her. Had something happened to a distant relative she barely knew? Or was this, somehow, about Thomas? So many years later? "Of course, Commander," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please come in." She led him into her small living room, the scent of old wood and books suddenly seeming too humble for such an imposing guest. He remained standing, declining her offer of a seat, his posture one of respectful alertness. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his tone softening slightly from its initial formality. "A few days ago, during the snowstorm, did you happen to give a forest, green, hand-knitted jacket to an elderly man near the town's war memorial?" Alara blinked, surprised. Of all the things she might have expected, this was not it. The image of the shivering man instantly returned. "Why, yes," she admitted, a little flustered. "Yes, I did. He looks so cold. Is he all right?" Commander Finch's expression remained serious, but a different quality entered his eyes, something akin to respect, perhaps even relief. "He is, Mrs. Vance. He's safe now." And he's warm, thanks to you. He paused, then continued. The man you helped is Master Chief Petty Officer Arthur Pendleton, retired, a decorated veteran of multiple campaigns, and until recently, a man we had lost track of. Alara absorbed this information slowly. Master Chief Petty Officer, decorated, Arthur Pendleton. The name was unfamiliar, but the titles resonated with a quiet dignity. The shivering, anonymous man on the bench suddenly acquired a history, a depth she hadn't perceived beyond his immediate suffering. We've been searching for Master Chief Pendleton for some time, Commander Finch explained. He has no living family that we know of, and he slipped through the cracks, as too many of our older veterans do. He's a proud man, not one to ask for help. The commander's gaze drifted for a moment to the photograph of Thomas in his uniform on the mantelpiece. Your late husband served, I see. Alara nodded, a quiet ache stirring in her chest. Yes, Thomas was in the army. He served in Korea. A look of understanding passed between them. Then you know something of the life, ma'am, and the sacrifices. I do, Alara said softly. Thomas. He carried his service with him, always. She thought of the quiet burdens he had borne, the unspoken memories that sometimes shadowed his eyes. It was this understanding, this inherited empathy, that had perhaps guided her actions without conscious thought. Her kindness to Arthur wasn't just an isolated act. It was an extension of a legacy of care, a quiet acknowledgement of a debt she felt society often overlooked. Thomas had always said, look after our own, and by our own. He'd meant not just fellow soldiers, but anyone who carried the invisible weight of hardship. Commander Finch continued, his voice now imbued with a softer cadence. Master Chief Pendleton was found by a patrol from the local Veterans Affairs outreach team. They'd been alerted that an elderly man was braving the storm. When they found him, he was disoriented but stubbornly refusing assistance until one of them noticed the jacket he was wearing. It was distinctive and far too new, too well cared for, to belong to someone in his apparent situation. He gestured vaguely, as if indicating Arthur's prior state of neglect. He was reluctant to talk, but eventually he told them about a woman. An angel in the snow, he called her, who gave him her jacket. He described you, and the location. He remembered your kindness with remarkable clarity, Mrs. Vance. It seems your act penetrated a fog of loneliness and cold that had surrounded him for a long time. Alara felt a blush creep up her neck. An angel in the snow. It sounded far too grand for what she had done. I only did what felt right, she murmured, looking down at her hands, which were clasped in her lap. He was clearly suffering. What you did, Mrs. Vance, Commander Finch said, his voice firm but gentle, was to show a measure of human compassion that is too often absent. Arthur Pendleton served this country for over 30 years. He was awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism during a covert operation in the early 70s. He saved the lives of 3 of his men, at great personal risk. He then went on to mentor generations of young sailors. He is, by any measure, a hero. And yet, he found himself alone, forgotten, freezing on a park bench. The commander's words painted a picture of a life of immense courage and dedication, starkly contrasting with the frail, shivering man Alara had encountered. The weight of Arthur's untold story settled upon her, heavy and profound. That such a man could be so lost, so invisible, was a sorrowful commentary. He mentioned you were worried about staying warm yourself, Commander Finch added. He was very concerned about that, even in his confusion. Alara shook her head. It was a small price. My discomfort was temporary. Master Chief Pendleton is now at the VA hospital in Kingsmont, the commander informed her. He's receiving medical attention, good food, and a warm bed. More importantly, he's reconnected with people who understand his service, who honor it. We have programs, support systems, but sometimes it takes a catalyst. A moment of profound, unexpected kindness, like yours, to bridge the gap. He paused, then opened his briefcase and took out a small, flat box. Master Chief Pendleton asked me to give you this. He's not much for words these days, but he was insistent. He handed the box to Alara. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was a military challenge coin. It was heavy, bronze, with an anchor emblem on one side and an inscription on the other. For service above self. Below it, in smaller letters, it read, From a grateful shipmate. Tears welled in Alara's eyes. She knew of challenge coins. Thomas had a few, cherished mementos of camaraderie and shared experience. To receive one, especially in this manner, felt like a profound honor, a silent acknowledgement that transcended words. "He wanted you to have it," Commander Finch said quietly, "as a token of his deepest gratitude, and mine, Mrs. Vance, and that of the United States Navy. You reminded us that the most important support systems are not always institutional. Sometimes, they are simply one human being reaching out to another." Alara could only nod, her throat too tight for speech. She clutched the coin, its cool metal, a tangible link to Arthur Pendleton, to his service, and now, to her small part in his story. It was not public glory, no grand pronouncements, but a quiet, deeply personal recognition that resonated more powerfully than any accolade. News, even quiet news, has a way of seeping through the cracks of a small town like Havenwood. Commander Finch's visit, though discreet, had not gone entirely unnoticed. The sight of an official Navy car outside Alara Vance's modest cottage was enough to stir gentle eddies of curiosity. No formal announcement was made, no newspaper story written, yet a subtle shift began to occur, like the first thaw after a long freeze. Mrs. Henderson, from the church auxiliary, stopped by a few days later, ostensibly to drop off a tin of her famous shortbread, but also to ask, with carefully veiled interest, if Alara was quite well. Having heard she'd been under the weather, a euphemism for anything out of the ordinary. Alara, true to her nature, simply thanked her for the cookies and said she was perfectly fine. Yet, the next morning, she found her front walk and driveway had been expertly shoveled clear of the accumulated snow. Long before she'd woken, there was no note, no indication of who had performed the task, just the cleared path, a silent gesture of goodwill. A week later, young Timmy Ashton, whose father ran the hardware store, appeared at her door with a slightly battered but serviceable wooden sled. "My dad said you might need this, Mrs. Vance, for getting your groceries and stuff when the paths are icy. We don't use it no more." He'd mumbled it quickly, cheeks red, before darting off. Alara knew the Ashtons had two younger children who would certainly still use a sled. These were small things, ripples spreading from an unseen stone. The community, in its own unspoken way, seemed to be acknowledging her, wrapping a subtle blanket of care around her, much as she had wrapped her jacket around Arthur. They did not know the specifics of Arthur Pendleton's story, or the commendation from a Navy commander, but they sensed that Alara, in her quiet way, had done something good, something worthy of their respect. Meanwhile, Arthur Pendleton, under the care of the VA hospital, began a slow journey back from the brink. The warmth, the regular meals, and the medical attention addressed his physical decline. But it was the rediscovery of connection that started to mend the deeper fractures. Other veterans at the hospital, hearing fragments of his story, not of his heroism, for he never spoke of it, but of his recent hardship and the unexpected kindness that had led him there, reached out. They shared stories, played checkers, sat in comfortable silence. The local VFW post, alerted by Commander Finch, arranged for visitors and began to help Arthur navigate the bureaucracy to secure the benefits he was long due but had never claimed. Commander Finch made it a point to visit Arthur regularly. During one visit, he found Arthur sitting by a window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds, the forest green jacket Alara had given him neatly folded on his lap. "She's a good woman, that Mrs. Vance," Arthur said, his voice stronger now, less raspy. He picked up the jacket, his gnarled fingers tracing the woolen pattern. This jacket! It was like a lifeline. Felt like someone still saw me, not just an old ghost. "She is indeed, Master Chief," Finch replied. "She asked about you, worried if you were warm." A rare, faint smile touched Arthur's lips. "Warmer than I've been in years, Commander. In more ways than one." He had started to speak more, not about his past glories, but about small things. The taste of the coffee, the kindness of a particular nurse, the way the sunlight fell across his bed in the morning. Despair was gradually, painstakingly, giving way to a fragile hope. Loneliness, his constant companion for so long, was slowly being replaced by tentative connections. The transformation was not dramatic, but it was real, like the slow turning of a great ship back towards its course. He even began to help in the hospital's small library, sorting books, his old librarian skills, perhaps finding a new, gentle purpose. He was still a man of few words, but his silence now seemed less heavy, less burdened by the crushing weight of isolation. A few weeks later, as the grip of winter began to loosen and the first hints of spring whispered on the breeze, Another car pulled up to Alara's gate. This time, it was a plain sedan, and from it emerged Commander Finch, not in his formal uniform, but in civilian attire. Beside him, moving slowly but with a newfound steadiness, was Arthur Pendleton. Alara, who had been tending to the first brave crocuses pushing through the damp earth near her porch, looked up in surprise. Arthur was wearing a new, warm coat, sensible and dark, but he carried her forest green jacket carefully folded over his arm. He looked different. His face had a little more color, his eyes were clearer, and though still frail, the desperate edge of his previous suffering had softened. "Mrs. Vance," Commander Finch said with a warm smile, "Arthur wanted to thank you in person, and to return this." Arthur stepped forward, his gaze meeting Alara's. It was still a profound look, but now it held not just weariness, but a deep, unwavering gratitude. He held out her jacket. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet but firm, I can't thank you enough. You saved me, not just from the cold." Alara felt her own eyes moisten. She took the jacket, its familiar weight a comfort in her hands. "Mr. Pendleton," she said softly, "I'm so glad to see you looking so well. Please call me Alara." "Arthur, then," he replied, a slight smile touching his lips. "This jacket, it was a good friend to me." "It's a good jacket," Alara agreed, smiling back. "Thomas, my late husband, he gave it to me. He would have been pleased to know it helped someone like you." Commander Finch discreetly stepped back, allowing them their moment. "I'm staying at the veterans' residence over in Kingsmont now," Arthur told her. "They're good folks." Commander Finch helped arrange it. He paused, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, clumsily wrapped package. "It's not much, but I wanted to give you something." Alara unwrapped it to find a small, hand-carved wooden bluebird, simply made but with a certain charm, its paint a cheerful, hopeful blue. "I used to whittle a bit," Arthur said, a touch of shyness in his voice. "It's not as good as I used to do, but—" "It's beautiful, Arthur," Alara said sincerely, her heart touched by the simple, heartfelt gift. "Thank you. I shall treasure it." She would place it on her mantle, near Thomas's photograph. They spoke for a little while longer, of simple things. Arthur mentioned the budding trees he could see from his window at the residence, the taste of spring in the air. Alara told him about her crocuses, the promise of her small garden awakening. There was no grand pronouncement of her deed, no public fanfare, just this. A quiet conversation on a spring afternoon, the return of a cherished jacket, the gift of a small bluebird, and the unspoken understanding of a life nudged back from the precipice by an act of simple kindness. Commander Finch eventually signaled it was time to leave. As Arthur turned to go, he paused. "That coin?" he said, his voice low. "I hope you keep it. It means a lot that you have it." "I will, Arthur," Alara assured him. "Always." She watched them drive away, the green jacket now back on its peg by the door, the little bluebird resting in her palm. The recognition she had received was not of public glory, but of a far more profound and personal kind. It was in Arthur's recovering health, in the respectful gratitude of Commander Finch, in the subtle warmth of her community, and in the quiet knowledge that she had made a difference, upholding a legacy of compassion that Thomas would have understood perfectly. Her life, already rich in quiet ways, felt somehow fuller, imbued with a renewed sense of connection to the wider world, a world that sometimes forgot, but could also, occasionally, remember and respond with grace. The seasons turned in Havenwood, each bringing its own quiet beauty. Spring unfurled in a riot of daffodils and tulips in Alara's small garden, the little wooden bluebird perched on her windowsill, a cheerful sentinel. Summer brought long, warm days, and Alara often sat on her porch, reading, the forest green jacket carefully stored away now, but its presence a comforting reassurance. She received a postcard from Arthur in late summer. It was a picture of a surprisingly lush vegetable garden, with Arthur, looking significantly healthier, kneeling beside a row of tomato plants, a genuine smile on his face. On the back, in a shaky but determined hand, he'd written, "The folks here helped me start a small garden. Good to have my hands in the earth again. Hope you are well. Your friend, Arthur." Alara smiled, tracing the image of the thriving plants, a new harvest season for him, in so many ways. It was a quiet echo of her own act of kindness, now returned tenfold in the visible renewal of a man's spirit. Occasionally, Commander Finch would call, just to check in on her and to give a brief update on Arthur. "Master Chief Pendleton," he reported, had become something of a quiet fixture at the veteran's residence, helping other residents, sharing his quiet wisdom, even mentoring a few younger veterans who were struggling to find their footing. The man who had been lost in the snow was now a source of stability for others. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the leaves on the oaks outside Alara's cottage turned to gold and crimson, a small package arrived for her. It was from Commander Finch. Inside, she found a brand new woolen jacket, the exact shade of forest green as her old one, impeccably tailored, warm and soft. Tucked into the pocket was a note. Mrs. Vance, a small token of continued appreciation from some of Arthur's shipmates who heard his story. They insisted, "May it keep you as warm as your kindness kept him." With deepest respect, Alistair Finch. Attached to the zipper pull was a small, discreetly engraved navy emblem. Alara held the new jacket to her cheek. It was lovely, practical, and deeply thoughtful. But it wasn't just a jacket, it was a symbol of a circle completed, of kindness recognized and returned, not in a way that sought to repay an unpayable debt, but to acknowledge its enduring power. She put on the new jacket and stepped out into her garden. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. She looked up at the vast expanse of the late afternoon sky, a canvas of deepening blue and soft, fading light. The world could be a cold place, indifferent and forgetful, but it also held moments of profound connection, of quiet grace that could alter a life, or simply warm a chilled soul. Her small act had not changed the world, but it had changed Arthur's world, and in doing so, had subtly, beautifully enriched her own. She thought of planting new bulbs for the coming spring, a ritual of hope and continuity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across her small patch of earth, Alara felt a quiet contentment settle over her. The memory of a man shivering on a bench, the weight of a challenge coin in her hand, the feel of new wool against her skin, all these were threads in a tapestry of shared humanity, a quiet reminder that even the smallest light could push back the deepest darkness, one kind act, one warm jacket at a time.